Your passport feels powerful until it suddenly is not. Imagine planning a trip, a visit, or important work, only to discover that your nationality alone stops you before you even reach the airport. No warning, no headline, just a silent refusal. Across the world, entire countries are now effectively closed to UK citizens, not because of individual actions, but because politics, conflict, and control redraw borders overnight. These are not travel inconveniences. They are hard stops that reshape where people can go, who they can see, and what futures remain possible. Number 1. Russia. Russia has effectively closed its borders to UK citizens through diplomatic and security-based restrictions. Following escalating geopolitical tensions, visa issuance for British passport holders has been suspended or severely limited. Political science research shows that states use travel controls as tools of retaliation during prolonged conflicts. Entry bans signal disapproval without direct confrontation. For ordinary travelers, this means flights may operate, but visas are denied, approvals delayed indefinitely, or entry refused at the border. These restrictions are not random. Studies on international relations explain that civilian mobility is often restricted to apply pressure while avoiding military escalation. UK citizens are categorized within broader Western access limits rather than individual risk assessments. Airlines enforce these rules before boarding, while embassies provide limited guidance. For business travelers, researchers, and dual nationals, uncertainty replaces planning, increasing costs, cancellations, and emotional strain connected to unpredictable access. Practical impacts extend beyond tourism. Academic migration research notes that entry bans disrupt family visits, academic collaboration, and humanitarian coordination. People adjust by rerouting through neutral countries, postponing travel indefinitely, or abandoning plans altogether. Warning signs include suspended visa services, travel advisories, and diplomatic expulsions. By 2027, prolonged restriction normalizes separation between populations. This situation demonstrates how geopolitical conflict reshapes personal freedom without visible borders closing. For UK citizens, Russia represents a case where nationality alone determines mobility, reminding travelers that passports reflect politics as much as identity in an increasingly fragmented global system. Such policies rarely reverse quickly because normalization of restrictions lowers diplomatic cost over time, embedding exclusion into routine governance and altering expectations for future engagement between societies. Institutions, researchers, families, and cultural exchange networks previously considered open and predictable for ordinary citizens worldwide. Number 2. Belarus. Belarus has imposed strict entry limitations on UK citizens as part of broader political retaliation. Diplomatic studies show that governments aligned with sanctioned states often mirror travel restrictions to signal loyalty and resistance. Visa approvals for British passport holders are frequently denied, delayed, or limited to rare exemptions. These measures reduce contact without formal declarations, creating a silent barrier that affects tourists, journalists, researchers, and business visitors seeking short-term access. Research on authoritarian border policy explains how selective bans maintain control while avoiding public escalation. UK citizens are grouped within Western national categories rather than assessed individually. Airlines and transit hubs enforce restrictions before departure, preventing boarding altogether. Embassies provide minimal timelines, increasing uncertainty and cost. Families face disrupted visits, while professionals cancel projects due to unpredictable clearance, reinforcing separation beyond official rhetoric. The practical outcome is gradual isolation. Mobility studies show repeated denial discourages future attempts, normalizing absence. Warning indicators include suspended consular services, tightened visa interviews, and reduced bilateral engagement. By sustaining restrictions over time, Belarus embeds exclusion into routine governance. For UK citizens, access becomes conditional on shifting politics rather than personal purpose. This demonstrates how travel bans reshape everyday freedoms quietly. Borders remain physically open, yet nationality determines movement, altering expectations for cooperation, exchange, and connection between societies that once maintained limited but functional contact. Over time, these limits affect education partnerships, cultural programs, and scientific dialogue, reducing shared understanding and increasing reliance on intermediaries, remote communication, and third country venues, which further distances communities and entrenches separation as an accepted norm within regional travel systems and everyday planning decisions for ordinary people across borders globally today permanently. Number 3. Iran. Iran has imposed strict entry controls on UK citizens, citing national security concerns and reciprocal policy responses. International relations research that states frequently restrict mobility during periods of prolonged tension to limit foreign influence and information flow. Visa approvals are rare, unpredictable, and subject to sudden cancellation, leaving travelers without reliable timelines. Embassy services operate intermittently, and airlines often deny boarding before departure, creating invisible borders that prevent movement without formal bans. This uncertainty transforms planning into risk management rather than routine travel decisions for civilians worldwide. Studies on reciprocal sanctions explain that security framing allows governments to justify blanket restrictions without individual assessment. UK passport holders are categorized alongside other Western nationals regardless of personal history, purpose, or risk profile. Researchers, journalists, and humanitarian workers face repeated refusals, increasing reliance on intermediaries or remote engagement. Over time, this erodes academic exchange, business contact, and cultural dialogue. Mobility studies show that persistent denial discourages future attempts effectively enforcing compliance through fatigue and cost. Families postpone visits indefinitely while institutions cancel collaboration plans due to uncertainty. This isolation deepens quietly over successive years. Practical consequences extend beyond tourism and business. Travel advisories, insurance exclusions, and airline enforcement combine to limit access before borders are reached. People adjust by choosing alternative destinations, delaying projects, or abandoning plans entirely. By sustaining restrictions, Iran demonstrates how geopolitics reshapes everyday freedom. For UK citizens, nationality alone determines mobility. Such controls normalize separation over time, embedding exclusion into expectations for engagement. Reversal remains unlikely without major diplomatic shifts. Until then, movement stays, conditional, shaping futures, choices, and connections across borders for ordinary people navigating global politics' daily realities. Number 4. North Korea. North Korea enforces a complete entry prohibition for UK citizens, making access virtually impossible under normal circumstances. Political science research identifies closed states using blanket bans to control information, limit foreign influence, and maintain regime stability. Unlike selective visa denials, this policy applies universally, regardless of purpose or background. Tourist programs exclude UK passports, journalists are barred, and humanitarian access requires rare multilateral approval. Airlines and tour operators enforce restrictions automatically, preventing boarding before departure and removing ambiguity for travelers. Studies on isolationist governance show that absolute bans simplify enforcement while signaling defiance externally. UK citizens are categorized solely by nationality, eliminating case-by-case assessment. This approach reduces diplomatic friction domestically while projecting strength abroad. Over time, mobility research shows such bans normalize absence. Families abandon reunion plans, researchers cancel fieldwork, and cultural exchange disappears. The border becomes psychological as well as physical, shaping expectations that contact will not resume soon. Practical consequences are absolute. There are no workarounds. transit tricks, or temporary permits available. Travel advisories, insurance exclusions, and airline compliance close every pathway. By 2027, continued prohibition reinforces separation as routine. North Korea illustrates the extreme end of travel bans, where citizenship alone determines movement. For UK citizens, this case highlights how geopolitics can erase mobility entirely, turning borders into permanent walls that outlast news cycles and redefine global access for generations. Such policies also influence international norms, encouraging other states to adopt similar exclusions, fragmenting mobility networks, reducing dialogue, and hardening divisions between populations, which increases misunderstanding, prolongs conflict, and limits humanitarian engagement, academic exchange, and people-to-people contact worldwide over decades, shaping expectations and restricting peaceful interaction across borders for ordinary civilians everywhere globally. Number 5. Afghanistan. Afghanistan effectively blocks UK citizens through a combination of security collapse and lack of international recognition. Travel research shows that when a state lacks stable governance, entry bans emerge without formal policy. Visas are unobtainable, borders unpredictable, and airlines refuse carriage due to safety and insurance rules. Even humanitarian access requires multilateral coordination and fluctuates with local conditions. For ordinary travelers, movement becomes impossible despite no single announcement declaring a ban, creating uncertainty that replaces normal planning and turns travel into unacceptable risk for civilians. Studies on fragile states explain how absence of recognition creates automatic exclusion. Without functioning embassies, visa processing halts entirely. Border control authority varies by region, increasing danger and inconsistency. UK travel advisories trigger airline enforcement long before departure, effectively sealing access without border interaction. Researchers, aid workers, and families face indefinite postponement. Mobility scholars note that uncertainty itself deters attempts, normalizing separation through cost, fear, and unpredictability rather than formal refusal or clearly defined entry policy. Practical effects are long-lasting and deeply personal. Projects relocate, academic collaboration shifts elsewhere, and families lose contact for years. Warning signs include suspended consular support, invalid insurance coverage, and closed air routes. By sustaining inaccessibility, Afghanistan demonstrates how collapse restricts movement as powerfully as law. For UK citizens, safety barriers erase mobility entirely. This condition persists independent of intent, embedding exclusion into global systems. Until governance stabilizes and recognition returns, access remains closed, reshaping expectations and reinforcing how security and legitimacy determine freedom of movement in the modern world for civilians. Institutions, humanitarian networks, and international cooperation structures worldwide across generations. Number 6. Eritrea. Eritrea maintains one of the most restrictive entry systems in the world, effectively blocking UK citizens through extreme visa control. Political research describes Eritrea as a closed state where movement is tightly regulated to preserve internal control. Visa approvals for British passport holders are rare, opaque, and often denied without explanation. Even approved travel is monitored, limited geographically, and subject to sudden cancellation. Airlines and insurers treat the country as high risk, preventing most travel before departure. Studies on authoritarian border regimes show how complexity functions as exclusion. Rather than announcing bans, Eritrea relies on bureaucratic barriers that discourage attempts. UK citizens face prolonged processing times, repeated document requests, and inconsistent requirements. Journalists, researchers, and aid workers encounter near total refusal. Over time, mobility research shows people stop trying altogether. This fatigue effect creates de facto bans without public policy, embedding exclusion quietly into global travel systems. Practical consequences extend beyond tourism. Academic exchange, humanitarian assessment, and family contact become impossible. Warning signs include closed consular services, lack of appeal mechanisms, and compulsory escorts for rare entrants. By maintaining isolation, Eritrea demonstrates how states restrict access without headlines. For UK citizens, nationality alone limits movement regardless of intent. Such regimes persist because opacity reduces diplomatic pressure. Over years, exclusion becomes normalized. This case highlights how freedom of movement can disappear without legal declaration, reshaping expectations for travel, cooperation, and contact. Eritrea's system reinforces a global trend where access depends less on personal purpose and more on political structure, limiting engagement across borders and reducing visibility into closed societies. This isolation affects civilians most, narrowing understanding, increasing reliance on secondary information, and entrenching separation that influences international relations, humanitarian awareness, and global mobility norms for decades ahead. Number 7. Syria. Syria effectively denies entry to UK citizens due to prolonged conflict and strict security controls. Research on war zone governance shows states restrict access to limit liability and manage information flow. Visas are rarely issued, and airline insurance rules prevent boarding. Even when routes appear technically open, enforcement occurs before departure. For civilians, this creates a hard barrier without a formal announcement. Planning becomes impossible as approvals change rapidly and border authority varies by region, turning travel into an unacceptable risk rather than a logistical challenge. Studies on conflict mobility explain how safety assessments override individual purpose. UK passport holders are treated uniformly, regardless of humanitarian, academic, or family reasons. Travel advisories trigger automatic refusals from insurers, carriers, and tour operators. Over time, repeated denial discourages attempts entirely. Families postpone reunions, researchers cancel fieldwork, and institutions redirect projects elsewhere. This sustained inaccessibility reduces exchange and deepens isolation while conflict continues, separating populations through administrative barriers rather than physical walls. Practical consequences extend across years. Warning signs include suspended embassies, invalid insurance coverage, and closed or unreliable airspace. By maintaining denial, Syria demonstrates how conflict reshapes freedom of movement without explicit bans. For UK citizens, nationality and risk classification determine access. Such conditions normalize absence and lower expectations for return. Until stability improves, access remains closed, shaping future choices and relationships across borders. This case illustrates how conflict removes mobility quietly, embedding exclusion into global systems and redefining what passports allow during prolonged instability. Number 8. Yemen. Yemen has become effectively closed to UK citizens due to ongoing conflict and humanitarian collapse. Research on fragile states shows that when security deteriorates, travel bans emerge through insurance rules and airline enforcement rather than law. Visas are unobtainable, airspace unreliable, and border control fragmented. Even experienced travelers face denial before departure as carriers refuse risk. This creates a silent prohibition where access disappears without formal policy, replacing mobility with uncertainty for civilians. Studies on humanitarian access explain that instability alone is enough to block movement. UK citizens are classified under high-risk categories, triggering automatic refusals from insurers, employers, and aid organizations. Humanitarian workers require multilateral approval that shifts constantly. Families attempting reunification face indefinite delays. Over time, repeated obstruction discourages attempts, normalizing separation. Mobility researchers describe this as functional exclusion, where danger and bureaucracy combine to enforce immobility without direct prohibition. Practical consequences extend across years. Warning signs include closed embassies, invalid insurance, and suspended air routes. By sustaining inaccessibility, Yemen shows how humanitarian collapse restricts movement as powerfully as law. For UK citizens, access remains closed regardless of intent. This condition reshapes expectations, redirecting projects, education, and family plans elsewhere. Until stability returns, absence becomes routine. Yemen illustrates how modern travel bans can emerge from risk management, leaving borders technically open yet functionally sealed, redefining freedom of movement for ordinary people navigating global instability. This reality affects aid delivery, journalism, and cultural exchange, increasing reliance on remote methods and intermediaries. Over time, prolonged closure alters regional networks, deepens isolation, and embeds exclusion into everyday planning for institutions and households. Mobility becomes conditional, temporary, and fragile, shaping decisions long before borders are reached by most civilians affected worldwide. Number 9. Libya. Libya effectively blocks UK citizens through fragmented authority and persistent insecurity. Research on failed states shows that when no single government controls borders, entry becomes unpredictable and unsafe. So visas cannot be reliably issued, and airlines refuse carriage due to insurance and liability rules. Even when paperwork exists, enforcement varies by region and armed group. This uncertainty transforms travel into a high-risk decision rather than a routine journey. Mobility scholars describe this as functional exclusion created by chaos instead of policy. UK nationals face automatic denial long before reaching Libyan territory. Fragmentation magnifies danger for civilians attempting entry. Studies on conflict zones show that lack of unified authority increases kidnapping, detention, and extortion risks. UK citizens are classified as high-value targets, intensifying enforcement refusal. Embassies cannot guarantee support, and evacuation options remain limited. Over time, repeated obstruction discourages attempts entirely. Families, researchers, and companies redirect plans elsewhere. Mobility research shows that when access feels dangerous, people stop seeking permission. Libya becomes absent from travel consideration despite geographic proximity. This absence hardens into routine expectation over years and erodes historical ties. Practical effects are long-lasting and absolute. Warning signs include suspended consular services, invalid insurance, and closed air routes. Businesses avoid engagement, humanitarian access shrinks, and academic exchange disappears. By maintaining fragmentation, Libya demonstrates how instability functions as a travel ban. For UK citizens, entry remains effectively impossible regardless of purpose. This condition reshapes expectations, redirecting futures elsewhere. Until governance stabilizes, absence becomes permanent. Libya illustrates how state failure erases mobility without formal bans. This reality alters regional networks, security planning, and civilian freedom of movement, affecting perception, access, and opportunity globally. Number 10. Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan operates one of the most restrictive visa systems in the world, effectively barring UK citizens from entry. Political studies describe the country as deeply isolationist, using border control to limit foreign influence and information flow. Visa approvals are rare, opaque, and often denied without explanation. Even business or cultural visits face months of delay and sudden rejection. Airlines enforce rules strictly, preventing boarding without confirmed clearance. This system creates a silent ban where access disappears through bureaucracy rather than declaration. Research on authoritarian governance shows complexity is used deliberately to discourage travel. Applicants face excessive documentation, unclear criteria, and shifting requirements that exhaust attempts. UK passport holders are grouped with Western nationals and denied individual assessment. Journalists, researchers, and aid workers encounter near total refusal. Over time, repeated denial normalizes exclusion. Mobility research explains that when effort outweighs reward, people stop trying, embedding separation into everyday planning. Practical consequences extend far beyond tourism. Academic exchange, business investment, and family contact are effectively impossible. Warning signs include closed consular channels, mandatory exit visas, and restricted internal movement for rare entrants. By maintaining isolation, Turkmenistan demonstrates how states restrict mobility without publicity. For UK citizens, nationality alone determines access. Such systems persist because opacity limits pressure. Over years, exclusion becomes routine. This case highlights how freedom of movement can vanish quietly, reshaping expectations for global travel, cooperation and contact, and reinforcing a world where access depends less on purpose and more on politics. These controls influence international norms, reduce dialogue, limit humanitarian visibility, and normalize exclusion as governance, affecting civilians most while entrenching separation across generations, institutions, and regions worldwide over time, without meaningful challenge or accountability from external actors globally. These cases show how freedom of movement can disappear without dramatic announcements. UK citizens are not being singled out individually, but grouped into broader political, security, and risk categories that quietly shut doors. Diplomatic conflict, authoritarian control, state collapse, and prolonged war all produce the same result. Access ends, plans dissolve, and distance becomes permanent. What makes these restrictions powerful is their invisibility. Borders appear open on maps, yet real movement stops through visas, airlines, insurance rules, and risk classification. This matters because travel is not only about tourism. It affects families, research, education, humanitarian work, and cultural exchange. When access is removed, understanding shrinks and separation hardens. Over time, absence becomes normal. Entire countries fade from consideration, not because people forget them, but because systems make engagement impossible. These bans and restrictions reveal how passports now reflect global politics as much as personal identity. If this breakdown surprised you, support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more global updates, and commenting on which country shocked you most. Your engagement helps surface topics that rarely get explained clearly. Watch the next video to see how travel restrictions are expanding worldwide and what it means for ordinary citizens navigating an increasingly fragmented world.